In a world that had long accepted the idea that growing old meant growing invisible, a quiet but powerful rebellion was underway. Not with protests or slogans, but with joy, companionship, and the unshakable will to live differently. The Golden Rebellion, as it came to be called, began in subtle ways. A few older adults rejecting the standard nursing home system and choosing instead to live together in vibrant co-living communities. One such story is of Eleanor, a 68-year-old retired literature professor who, after losing her husband and surviving a bout of cancer, found herself at a crossroads. The brochures for nursing homes made her feel small, like she was preparing for an ending instead of a new beginning. And that's when she heard about Aurora Haven, a co-living home in a small coastal town built not for care, but for connection. With slight hesitation and a packed suitcase, she arrived to a house filled with art on the walls, laughter echoing in the hallways, and people her age who weren't waiting for life to end. They were living it on their own terms. At Aurora Haven, Eleanor's days started with yoga under the sun, continued with shared meals where recipes were exchanged like stories, and ended with book clubs, film nights, or spontaneous jam sessions in the common room. These weren't patients under care. They were travelers, musicians, painters, storytellers. They had histories filled with both trauma and triumph, and they leaned on each other not out of need, but out of choice. There was Thomas, a former jazz musician who taught saxophone lessons to local teens every Thursday, and Grace, a 75-year-old ex-nurse who ran a small herb garden and sold her teas online. The energy of the home was not old. It was alive, rebellious, even youthful. Eleanor, once shy and withdrawn, found herself rekindling passions she had buried decades ago. She started writing again. She read her poems aloud to the house on Friday nights, and she laughed, a deep, uncontrolled laugh she hadn't felt since her 20s. She wasn't just surviving, she was thriving, and she wasn't alone. Across the world, from Scandinavia to South Korea, co-living communities were emerging like blooming fields after a long winter. These places weren't built by corporations. They were built by people, often seniors themselves, who were tired of being treated like burdens. What made these co-living homes different wasn't luxury, but autonomy. Residents contributed based on their abilities. Some cooked, some taught, some managed the finances, and others simply provided stories that inspired. There was no nurse constantly checking vitals unless it was needed. There was no fluorescent lighting or bland furniture. Instead, each home had personality, culture, warmth. The Golden Rebellion was not about rejecting care. It was about redefining it. Care wasn't being fed and washed on a schedule. Care was being surrounded by people who saw you, who respected your choices, and who wanted to build life with you. The media began to take notice. Documentaries were made. Young architects started designing senior spaces that looked more like modern artist colonies than sterile facilities. Families who once assumed a nursing home was the only option now explored co-living as a first choice. Governments in progressive regions began offering incentives to create more of these living spaces, and intergenerational co-living, where young adults lived with seniors, gained popularity. But the greatest change wasn't visible. It was emotional. People like Eleanor, who once feared the quiet loneliness of old age, now looked forward to waking up. Birthdays became community festivals. Illness was met with support, not sorrow. Grief was shared, not hidden. And aging, once seen as decline, became a celebration of wisdom, freedom, and rediscovery. When Eleanor turned 70, the house threw her a themed party, the Decade of Dreams. They decorated the garden with lights, dressed in bohemian colors, and sang her favorite songs. She stood before everyone, holding a glass of red wine, and with tears in her eyes, she said, "I thought my life was over. I thought I was finished. But this home, this family, you all gave me a second life. And this time, I'm living it with purpose." That night, as candles flickered in mason jars and music floated into the air. Eleanor wasn't a lonely widow anymore. She was a woman reborn, thanks to a revolution that had no flag, no anthem, but all the heart in the world. The Golden Rebellion continues today, growing with every elder who refuses to fade quietly and chooses instead to shine together. It's not just about living longer, it's about living louder. For Frank and Amina, retirement wasn't a gentle walk into the sunset. It was a door to something wild, long forgotten, and wonderfully unpredictable. After 40 years of early alarms, mortgage payments, parenting, and playing it safe, they found themselves at the edge of a new chapter. Their kids were grown, the house felt quiet, and their routine had become a shadow of who they once were. One rainy Sunday, while flipping through a forgotten travel magazine, Amina paused at an ad. Golden Trails, travel clubs for adventurous seniors. It featured a silver-haired couple zip-lining in Costa Rica, smiling with the thrill of life. That night, over tea, she asked Frank, "What if we just went?" The next month, they boarded a plane to Spain with a group of 12 strangers, all over 60, all hungry for something more than bingo nights and hospital visits. What they found on that trip was far greater than tapas and flamenco. They found freedom. These travel clubs weren't just vacations, they were declarations of life, unfiltered, unsupervised, and unbelievably rich. Every journey became a memory stitched into the fabric of their reborn lives. Sailing in Greece, hiking the Dolomites, dancing with 100 strangers at a beach party in Thailand. They met seniors who had lost spouses, fought cancer, left toxic families, or simply decided that they'd spent too many years on the sidelines. Together, they swapped stories on mountaintops, comforted each other through altitude sickness and heartbreak, and laughed until sunrise in cities they couldn't pronounce. In Patagonia, Frank finally tried paragliding, something he'd dreamed about for 35 years. In Tokyo, Amina sat in a quiet temple garden and wept, not from sadness, but from overwhelming gratitude. The world, they realized, had not closed itself off to them. They had simply forgotten to knock. These clubs offered more than discounted group tours. They provided purpose, companionship, and proof that the thirst for wonder never dries up. Some trips were focused on volunteering, building schools in Cambodia or teaching English in Morocco. Others were about leisure, river cruises through Eastern Europe or culinary trails in Mexico. But every journey reminded them they were alive. Frank began writing travel essays. Amina started a vlog for senior women of color who feared they'd waited too long to see the world. On a cruise through the Norwegian fjords, one woman, 84-year-old Judith, told the group, "My husband always said we'd travel after retirement. He died before we did. So I travel for both of us now." Her story wasn't rare. It echoed in the hearts of everyone present. These journeys became healing spaces, celebration spaces, and occasionally, romantic ones. Frank and Amina witnessed two seniors in their 70s fall in love during a trip to Morocco and get married on a boat in Santorini. Travel didn't just expand their geography, it rebuilt their souls. When the pandemic hit, the travel paused, but the community didn't. They hosted Zoom reunions, shared recipes from their travels, and planned dream itineraries for the post-lockdown world. And when the borders reopened, they didn't hesitate. Because for people like Frank and Amina, the clock didn't tick toward the end, it ticked toward the next departure gate. Today, they've visited 34 countries, made hundreds of friends, and have no plans of slowing down. Their children, initially skeptical, now gift them luggage instead of sweaters. Their grandchildren follow their adventures on Instagram. And their neighbors? They've started traveling too. This isn't retirement. It's a renaissance. It's a reminder that the heart doesn't age, it just waits for permission to soar. And for Frank and Amina, and thousands like them, the sky is no longer the limit. It's just the beginning. While most of the neighborhood was still tangled in dreams, The local park echoed with the rhythmic breath of a runner, not a young athlete, but 72-year-old Rajni Mehra, who had become an icon of defiance, discipline, and fire. Clad in running shoes older than her granddaughter, her steps were steady, her eyes focused, and her resolve unmatched. But Rajni hadn't always been a morning warrior. A decade ago, she could barely climb stairs without pain. Diagnosed with early-stage arthritis, grieving her husband's sudden death, and watching her social life wither, she had spiraled into a quiet depression. Her days blurred between pain meds and television reruns. Until one afternoon, she saw an online video of a 90-year-old man completing a triathlon. It shook her. That night, she pulled out her old gym clothes, laced up dusty sneakers, and walked for 5 minutes. That walk turned into 10, then into stretches, then into yoga, and soon into a daily ritual of movement that healed not just her body, but her spirit. Rajni joined a senior fitness boot camp where people like her, some in their 60s, some in their 80s, pushed boundaries together. There were women doing Zumba with oxygen tanks nearby, men lifting weights with trembling hands but fiery determination. The boot camp wasn't about six-packs or competition, it was about taking back control, breath by breath. Rajni went from barely walking to leading group hikes. Her muscles strengthened, her posture improved, and so did her voice. She started speaking at wellness events, became a YouTube mentor, and launched an online program called Fit After 50, with over 500,000 followers. She taught that discipline isn't about youth, it's about self-respect. Her story traveled the globe, featured in fitness magazines, covered by wellness blogs, and celebrated in her hometown where she eventually opened a community gym for elders, subsidized by donations. Every morning, elders now show up, some for fitness, others for friendship, many for healing. A 67-year-old stroke survivor who couldn't lift his hand 6 months ago now does modified push-ups. A 75-year-old woman recovering from breast cancer does laughter yoga and says she hasn't felt this alive since college. Rajni watches all this not as a guru, but as a fellow traveler, someone who chose to rewrite her story when the world was ready to write her off. She reminds them, it's not your age that slows you down. It's your excuses. She still rises before dawn, runs in the park, and prays under the rising sun. But now she doesn't run alone. She runs with a silent army behind her, people she's never met, who saw her story and decided to try. Across the world, senior fitness boot camps are now rising, in church halls, on rooftops, on beaches. They carry Rajni's message. Age is just biology. Your spirit decides the rest. And for every older person who chooses to walk a little more, eat a little better, or believe again, Rajni's heartbeat is there too, cheering, running, living proof that strength is ageless. In a world dominated by hashtags, filters, algorithms, and 20-second attention spans, no one expected the next wave of internet legends to be born in quiet kitchens, assisted living rooms, or cozy porches. But against all odds, a silent, soulful revolution swept across the digital world, not powered by brand deals or trending dances, but by wisdom, warmth, and unfiltered authenticity. They called them the digital dreamers, seniors who didn't just log on to the internet, they redefined it. It began with people like Martha Simmons, an 80-year-old widow from Illinois, who baked a family apple pie recipe while her granddaughter filmed her on TikTok. She wasn't trying to go viral. She was just being herself, humming an old gospel tune and gently explaining how her grandmother taught her to use cinnamon. The video exploded. 4 million views in 72 hours, comments pouring in from teenagers in Korea to chefs in Italy. This feels like home. I wish she was my grandma. This made me cry. Martha was overwhelmed, but the messages weren't about fame. They were about connection, and Martha wasn't alone. Around the globe, seniors began stepping in front of cameras not to prove anything, but to share. A 77-year-old man in Nigeria taught hand-carving techniques, and told fables his grandfather once told him. A 70-year-old Sikh grandmother in Punjab became a YouTube star making roti and teaching forgiveness. A retired history teacher in Argentina posted story times about world events he had lived through. These weren't influencers. They were lifelines, digital storytellers connecting generations across time and space. With every video, they shattered the stereotype of aging as decline. They showed that memory, love, skill, and soul don't fade. They evolve. And in doing so, they built unexpected fan bases. Gen Z creators asking for life advice, millennials learning parenting tips, lonely teens finding comfort in grandmotherly voices from thousands of miles away. One 85-year-old gamer in Japan, Grandpa Toshi, streamed puzzle games while giving advice on grief, patience, and how to live alone after loss. Comments came in languages he couldn't read, but he smiled at every emoji. These seniors weren't chasing clout. They were offering something rare in the online world: authenticity without agenda. The internet, once a space where age meant irrelevance, became their stage, not because they adapted to technology, but because the world slowed down just enough to finally listen. And the impact? Massive. Brands shifted. Campaigns began including gray hair and wrinkle-lined smiles. Universities invited digital seniors to guest lecture on resilience and emotional intelligence. Netflix bought a documentary about 5 senior YouTubers who changed lives through their content. Schools began using their videos in curriculum. One retired soldier's video about surviving war became required viewing in high schools across Eastern Europe. These creators reminded the world, history doesn't just exist in books. It breathes in the people who lived it. And they were no longer invisible. They were celebrated, followed, stitched, duetted, and most importantly, remembered. As their influence grew, something even more powerful happened. Other seniors, once hesitant, shy, or self-doubting, felt inspired to try. A woman in her late 60s who hadn't spoken publicly in 30 years uploaded a video of her reading poetry. A widower in his 80s shared how he learned to cook after losing his wife and now feeds the homeless every weekend. These weren't polished productions. They were real. And they resonated deeply because they reminded us of what the internet was supposed to be: a tool to connect humans, not divide them. The digital dreamers gave us a roadmap back to empathy. But perhaps the most moving aspect of this digital revolution is what it has done within families. Grandchildren began seeing their elders not as outdated, but as heroes. Conversations returned to dinner tables. Video calls replaced silence. Young and old began to collaborate, co-creating content, co-writing songs, even starting joint podcasts. The generational divide began to shrink, not because seniors caught up to the world, but because they showed the world how to slow down and listen. Martha Simmons, now 84, recently said in a live stream, "I used to think my life ended when I lost my husband. But every time I hit record, I feel him with me. I feel alive. I feel seen." She closed that video with her signature line, "You're never too old to be brand new." And maybe that's the final truth in all of this. Aging isn't a sentence. It's a story. One that doesn't end in silence or solitude, but in evolution, reinvention, and yes, even re-influence. The revolution we've been talking about, from co-living spaces and travel clubs to fitness warriors and digital dreamers, isn't just about seniors doing new things. It's about all of us rethinking